Hi, everybody, again. My talk is called Time to Get Organized. I've learned over the past 21 years that the more organized your paperwork is, the better you can advocate for your child, whether it be with medical professionals, educational, psychology, everybody, because you have all tons of documentation that is usually very helpful. Sorry, the trash truck's going by. Okay. So this is what I've learned in my years of experience of dealing with a less than desirable school district and some really great folks and some really challenging folks in the medical world. Um, Back in 2013, I attended the Rights Law Conference on, it was the law and advocacy. So Pete Wright himself taught it in California, and it was the best class I ever took. I can't begin to emphasize how much going on the rightslaw.com website and signing up for that newsletter, every single time they sent something, there was always at least one article that was relevant to my family or into my advocacy work. You'll learn so much. There's a lot of information. I have to say there's not fetal alcohol, which I've written to him and asked him to add to his stuff. However, all the other things about advocating at school are there. So it starts with getting your paperwork organized, and it's a different system than what most people would think, because you would usually think to put your IEPs together, maybe lab work together. And this is totally different. And it really, the act of doing the work is a pain in the butt. I'll tell you, it's a lot of work, but it also is very helpful when you need the information to have medical and school from the same time period together, because it will spark your memory about what was really going on with your child at the time. So attend one of his classes. I know he's doing them on Zoom right now. If you can manage it, it's life-changing. And he himself will teach you how to understand test scores, which to me was like night and day difference, because then IEP teams could never pull the wool over my eyes about, well, your child is average, when that in fact really is not the case, because they try to make everybody average to avoid spending money that they don't have helping your child. So this information is for families that cope with medical, academic, therapeutic, and medication management issues. And all of this paperwork will go in the books that you'll create together. Okay, so retaining and organizing your information. You have to create the system. And once it's done, it's very easy to maintain. It's just punching holes and sticking stuff in the book in the order that you receive it. But in the beginning, most people have boxes, shoe boxes, trash bags, paper bags full of documentation. It's usually not organized by child, so it's all thrown in there. I was totally guilty. I had one box and I just started throwing everything. I'm a paper saver, so fortunately I didn't throw anything away, but it was useless being in a box unorganized and mushed up with 2 kids worth of documentation. So once I created this system, it was really easy when my memory would be sparked and I'd be like, let me go to the book. And there it was. And then I could get the school district or doctor or whoever to, I kind of killed them with the evidence, you might say. And that helped my children a lot. Okay, so I'm going to show you the supplies the best I can. I always say, get yourself a really good paper puncher. And this is one that has a handle on the top that I can, so it doesn't kill my hand and it punches a lot of paper all at once. This cost me about $14. It is like the best little low-tech tool I have in my office. I know it sounds silly, but you're going to be punching boatloads of paperwork. Get a good one. You'll need 3-inch binders. This is my daughter's. And as you can see on this side, I'm not very good at doing fancy tabs. I use like Post-it notes up there. I don't know if you can see. And then I have pictures on the front, so it kind of tells me what ages are in this book. You can obviously put that information on the back binder. They are numbered in order. In my case, this was book number 2 for her. I have 5 of these for my daughter. 5. I know. That's how much paperwork one child generated. And 90% of it isn't me. This is what other people generated on my child. Okay, this one is going to require a little bit of. This is the box, the file folder box, and you can see the files are hung in there, which makes it really easy to store all the extra stuff, or at least place stuff in until you get it in your book. I know it sounds silly to show all that, but it's really just that basic. Excuse me a second. If you have more than one child, which a lot of us do, to color code your kids. So my daughter's clearly aqua and my son was purple. So that was his box you saw. And it makes it easy for just knowing where to grab and keep things more organized. So just choose a color. These binders you can find at Staples, Amazon, wherever. They're easy to find, but try to get yourself the 3-inch ones because you're going to fill a lot of them. Highlighters, you know what those are. I use 2 different colors, pink and Post-it notes. If you're like me and not very good at using binder dividers, it's depending on how organized you are. I found my little Post-its sticking up with what is like, so when there was one particular triennial that I referred to a ton, I put a Post-it note on it so I could get back to those assessment results easily. And I had one for each kid that seemed to be like the basis of a lot of discussions. So I was able to grab it. And I even have taken these books with me to meetings if needed when I knew I was going to need to refer. But it makes it really easy for you when they're trying to hand you. And again, I have had a very negative experience in school with both of my children. So I apologize in advance for not speaking highly. I cannot say that about here in Florida. We've had a great experience. Please excuse my negativity about it, but when I was being handed a line of bunk and I could go back to a document that they generated in the past and say, but, and then they shut up and stopped trying to hand me a load of bunk. So it is very helpful to have this information that the school districts have generated. And then you need a pencil. I know this sounds funny, but you're gonna, when you sort, you're gonna put dates in the bottoms of all your documents, and you wanna do it in pencil, because if you need to erase or to photocopy those documents in the future, you wanna be able to erase the date and so that it's not showing up in the photocopy and it looks, there's no marking on original documents. And if you feel the need to highlight your IEPs, copy it and do not mark the original documentation. Use a second copy and write to your heart's content, but keep the original, the original. Okay, so to prepare, like I said, our kids have multiple care providers, multiple diagnoses. Sometimes it takes, like my son's case, 14 years to figure out what that fetal alcohol was the driver of all his other challenges. So you will have a ton of paperwork from all these people. Save everything, and including your emails. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes. Locate all of your boxes, to pillowcases, trash bags, drawers, everything, and get all of your documentation into one location when you start this process. And you begin by separating your paperwork by your child. That alone took me the longest because I stupidly threw it all into one box and I had to sit there and figure out whose was whose. A lot of times the names are on it, but in emails that I printed, it's not necessarily clear until you read the email which kid you're talking about. Unless there's a teacher that sparks your memory because only one child had that teacher, you kind of have to look through and figure it out. You prevent your future paperwork mix-up during the sorting process by sorting each child's documents in different boxes. So once you get it sorted, separate them for good so that they never get mixed up again. and then how you're going to sort all of your documents once you have them all together and in one location and then separated by child, if that's relevant to you, is you start with one of your children. And in my case, I started with my daughter because she literally had been in our school district since an infant program at 4 months old. So there was a lot of paperwork to go in hers. And I actually started each of their books with a copy of their adoption orders and their birth certificates. So in the future, if I've got the actual originals that are put away and I am at the school or need a copy of a copy, it's always in the front of the very first book. So you just know in a pinch, if you need it for Little League or wherever, you can make a copy of the copy in the book. So that's what I started with, because those two documents were used a lot of times over their childhoods for registering for various things and new therapists and people who wanted to see the documentation. It was already easily accessible. Don't pull punch your original birth certificates though, or your original orders with the stamps. Keep those separate. You sort your documents into piles. So once your child is sorted, then you're going to sort the sort by year. So every document from, in her case, 2003, 2004 forward until I probably started this about, so 2013 is when I started doing this. So that was what, 7, 8 years ago. And then what you're going to do as you sort the documents, on the lower right-hand corner is where you're going to put the date. So figure out what the date of the document is and lightly pencil it into the lower right-hand corner. And then you're going to sort all of those documents by each year, and then from January to December. So you should end up with 12 piles per year. But as you sort it, the easiest thing to do is to use your hole puncher and start the book so that you don't lose things, or things don't they get out of order. It's just easier to get your book and start hole punching. And it is, everything for that time period is going to go in date order. And Pete recommends that you don't read everything initially because it's too much. So just figure out the essence of the story, what's on it, get it in date order, and then start punching it and sticking it in the book. You'll place all the documents, like I said, in the date order. And sometimes it's a little hard with email threads. You pick what's comfortable for you, either when the thread started or when the thread ended. Because in some cases that could be 2 or 3 weeks difference. I always use the beginning of the thread. So whatever started that thread, that's the date where I stuck it in my book, just so I'd have some reference of when the conversation started. It's amazing what you find in old emails if you've saved them. And the best idea for doing that is, I have a Yahoo account and a Gmail account. I created subfiles in my Yahoo, one for my daughter, one for my son. And every single email that I received goes in that, and I still have them all in there. And then when you need them, all you need to do is either put a subject search or a date search. And sometimes you'll be amazed at what you find in there. And those old emails can save your butt when you're trying to get services for a child that were either denied in the past or given in the past and taken away, is to have all of those emails. And I print the really important stuff, like usually it's because they said yes to something, or there was a huge bone of contention. I hard printed those and put those in my book so that I knew that there was whatever the email drama, and it's in documented evidence a lot of times of what's going on with your child. So emails are super important. And also, when you send an email, if you're asking for a response and they don't respond, then you can print that and save those sent emails also in the same file. And then you can delete the one that's sent once the thread arrives. Otherwise, you can have 2 different ones. But you need evidence or just documentation that you actually sent the email then save all of it. And like I said, just sort, no detailed reading. That is going to come in play, but not yet. Once the documents are cited, are sorted and in date order, excuse me, you begin at the beginning, literally. And like I said, birth certificate first, hole punch, only final copy. So with IEPs, a lot of times there could be multiple copies of it, particularly if you don't sign your emails. And the law says they're supposed to give you a copy of the draft 5 days before your IEP meetings. So when they would send me that draft, I would review it. I'd mark up those drafts because I usually always had questions or found discrepancies in the present levels or what I wanted to say in my parent note part, which you have every right to put whatever you want in that section, and they have to copy and paste word for word what you give them to put in the parent concern section. So all of that I would write on those drafts. And that box that you saw, I have all those old drafts in there, and only the final IEP goes into your book. So you'll find if you go back, you might have multiple copies. Again, Florida does things a little bit differently than California, but base my information on what your experience is and mold it to how it works for you in your school district. But do not get rid of all those, because sometimes even the notes I wrote on old IEPs were helpful. And I just put those by year. So like kinder, first, second, third. So whatever drafts of the IEPs were in for that year went in the hanging file folder. And each child only has one of those boxes, luckily, and they're not even full because most of the documentation is in the books. Okay. And don't throw any duplicates of anything away. If nothing else, the duplicates are good for writing notes on, or just to have as a working document in the future if you need it. So save all of the duplicates that you get from your school district. I only also put report cards. The last report card is in the book. The others are in the box, because the final report card with all of the grades is the one that you really want to see. And I always knew to go to the end of that school year to find the report card if the report card was anything that was in question. In California, we had trimesters, so three sections in elementary, and then when they went to middle school, it became semesters with a quarter in the middle. So there would be 3 or 4 report cards per year, and only one goes in your book. Be sure the info discussed moves forward in each draft of the IEP. What I mean by that is, again, if it's a multiple meeting IEP, you have to make sure that what's on that first draft and then what you discussed, the next draft has the info. So compare the two to make sure all your information, because you might discuss something and the team might change something, and you want to make sure that the draft that ends up at the end is the one that has that documentation. And I'm not judging the school district. There's a lot of information that goes back and forth in IEP meetings, like a ton. And sometimes it's just simply an oversight on their part. That's why I constantly had a working draft at the meetings where I wrote notes, so that I could make sure by the time that final one, that if we made a decision, that it's either in the notes of the IEP or that like time or service is changed, because it's easy for everybody on that team to mess up and forget something. And that final signed document is a legal document, so everything needs to be correct in that document. And all those drafts you have are helpful in making sure that all the things you discussed end up in that final IEP. It sounds like a ton of work, but once you get used to doing it this way, it's very helpful, and it makes sure that something that was verbally discussed in the IEP ends up in the IEP, so that they can't say 6 months later, we didn't increase the speech therapy by 15 minutes because it wasn't in the final draft of the IEP, although it should have been. So that's what I'm saying, is to make sure that you really pay good attention. And if you have a hard time, which I did too, sometimes these meetings are horribly emotional and they're talking about your child and it's usually not very good. is to bring a second person. I often brought my good friend Judy, and she would be the note taker, or she'd be the second set of ears. And then we would, after the meeting, we would discuss. And a lot of times she had a better perspective of what was said, because I'm like drowning in misery of thinking about, things that were not pleasantly spoken about. And I'm not saying that they dissed my child, but it's just hard to hear all this low functioning. One of my kids has an intellectual disability, so everything was hard with her, because that reality is hard to accept and realize that this is a dependent child for the rest of your life. So when you're thinking all that stuff, these legal things are going on around you. So if you can bring a second human, it's highly advised. I fell into this trap a lot, and I finally learned to bring her, and it helped a lot to have that other person there. And like I said, the older you're going to start your book with at the beginning and work your way in. So a lot of times you file in your folders in your filing cabinets, the most recent is in the front of the book. You want to start and go, like I said, the birth certificate, and keep going, and then start the next book. So everything starts from page one and it goes down, not like, don't throw the most recent thing in the front of the book. You want everything in date order. And this is for history, because in the future, you'll know that your system is consistent and easy to find things. And like I said, I use the little post-it tabbies at the top. And I put them at the top just because on the side, when you shove it into a shelf, they get smushed worse. So I found on the top, they don't get torn off or messed up. So it sounds silly, but it just worked for me. Do what works for you. And then you figure out a way to label your binder dates. Like I said, I did pictures of my kids that I liked on the fronts, so I knew when, and then I labeled each notebook with a Sharpie, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then for my son, he has 3 books, so 3. And that way, if you're really smart, you'll actually put the first document date and the last document date on there. I never got around to that, but it's good for you guys to do that too if you're trying to find things by date. Okay, the documents that go into the binders. There are a lot of well child visits in those first couple of years, like healthy stuff. If it's important to your child, then stick it in there. But if you're just getting routine labs all the time, might not want to stick it in the book, and save that in the hanging folder. Uh, in our case, because we were with social workers, we had tons of extra visits. We had social worker visits and all that. I did not put all of that. I put the quarterly case reviews with the 2 sets of social workers that come in California, uh, because I used a foster family agency, and then DCFS had 2 different workers. So I only put those important quarterly meetings in the book. You decide what is relevant and important in your world when you go back to that old history, if you got little kids or were foster children, which most of us, that is the case. So like important medical records, like radiological exams, particularly if they were scans for medical problems, or there's a injury, you want to put those in. Relevant labs that are off the chart, like my daughter had this one, alkaline phosphatase. It's to do with the liver, but it also has to do with bone growth and kidneys. Everybody's is supposed to be under 100, and hers was in the 600 range. And it took a whole host of specialists at UCLA talking with each other to never figure out why hers was, because not any other lab was weird. Just this one was off the charts, crazy bad. So they chalked it up to bone growth as she was in her growth spurts. Go figure. But so those were important, and those went in my book. But her routine labs, I stick them in the box. And in my case, we had what's called regional center, which is APD here in Florida. When you apply for that, when your child, for foster kids, get it automatically, and they are followed those first 3 years pretty much automatically if there's prenatal exposure or suspected anything. So all of those quarterly reviews also went in this book, and they were also very helpful with the school district eventually, because all kids are booted to the school district at age 3, no matter what early start program they're in the 50 states. They will get sent over to a public school district to start services. But having all that documentation for them in years later, because they were trying to say, I mean, my daughter wasn't diagnosed with her intellectual disability until age 8, and we went back to try to figure out how that got missed. And it was really helpful to have those early start documents. So I put those in the book. Routine, like I said, all routine stuff goes into the box. Psychological assessments like triennials or any kind of assessments done in the private sector or for like something like the Florida Center, you would want those to go in your book in the order where that happened in your child's life. And those are the kind of things you flag because you'll refer to that. In our case, the regional center did assessment and then UCLA did one on her. And I refer to those constantly, even in adulthood. That's how I just got guardianship for her. And we were able to qualify for APD services, even though we're on a ridiculously long waiting list, we're at least approved. So I had those documents to use to help support my application for her. So let's see, all school documents, especially the IEP. If something is missing, when you do a review of your paperwork, you are going to notice that things are missing. And that's when you put in writing by email to your school district that you need a copy. And they're obliged within, I believe the safeguards say 5 days, they have to give you a copy of what's missing. So just make a list of things. If you notice, like, I don't have the 3rd grade IEP final signed document, then you're going to request a copy from the school district because it needs to be in your book too. And you'll be surprised sometimes in lost in translation, things don't always go equally. And again, no dissing the school district. They got 11% of their kids on IEP, so it's a lot of them to keep track of. So I kind of give a benefit of the doubt for stuff like that. OT, PT, and speech assessments, very important. Save all of those. Independent. In my case, I had an independent educational eval. That's where the school district is obliged to pay for somebody outside of the school district to do an assessment because you disagree with the school district's assessment initially. You know, they missed something, or you are not comfortable that the school psychologist fully grasped your child's needs, then you can request an independent assessment that the school district has to pay for. And you get to pick who does the assessment at as long as they're qualified. They have the right, I call them the doodads or credentials, like, you know, PhD, MD, FACC, all those, I call those the doodads. They have to have those behind the right ones to do the assessment. But if the school district has failed your child because their assessment is kind of stinky, you can request that. And sometimes it's a full psychological assessment, and sometimes it might just be a speech and language assessment that you want an independent person to do. The school district gets first try at it, so you never can deny them. But if you have a child who is having huge struggles with speech and they're saying nothing's wrong, there's clearly something wrong. So that's when you put in writing and request an independent assessment. And they have to give you an answer in writing. It's called a prior written notice. And once that is done, you get to pick somebody. And those independent assessments, I've had 2 of them for my kids, made a huge difference in services that we got. As I said, children with special needs have multiple care providers. We had post-adoption services, so that would be wraparound. We had this program at UCLA called TIES for adopted families, which blew my mind how little they understood about fetal alcohol. Nobody in this clinic diagnosed either of my children. It was outside, but a lot of the stuff that happened in there, I saved their stuff, and it was also very helpful to have that in the history. So save all of that. Let's see. So like I said, correspondence with the email. Every single time you have an interaction with somebody at school where a decision about your child is made. And I'm not talking about picking your kid up from the classroom and saying hello. That's not it. But if you stop in the classroom and the teacher's like, oh, your child missed their speech therapy for the past 2 weeks because the therapist has been sick. So we're going to, compensatory time means they have to make up those dates because the minutes or the sessions are in the IEP and they have to meet the obligation in the IEP because it's a contract. That kind of a conversation, I would go home and write, based on our conversation in your classroom you indicated that the speech therapist was out sick and that two dates will be added to, or two therapy sessions will be made up in this session. Please let me know if I've understand this correctly. And you give them the opportunity to correct you, but you document and for historical purposes that conversation took place. So always email those kind of, even if it's impromptu in the office with your teacher, you want those things documented so that they actually come through and give those two sessions to your child because they're legally obliged to do so. And it is nice that the teacher told you because you might not have ever known, but document it. And those are the kind of emails you want to put in your book to make sure that they follow through with that. And just another thing I learned through the years, that the ancillary services like PT, OT, speech, psychological services at school, they have to keep records of all of those. So there'll be like session notes. And if you have a suspicion that you're not getting those, or your child isn't receiving them, or they're not doing, and again, I'm not dissing the therapist. Sometimes it's the wrong decisions were made in the IEP and you guys need to revisit it because they need to try something different. Those session notes are available for you to see. Everything in your child's record, you're entitled to. So if you're having any issues with those ancillary services, ask to see the notes. First of all, it's going to verify that they actually did the services that they were supposed, because they're on an honor system. You have no idea unless you have a fully verbal child who can tell you, I went to speech today and I hated it, and this is why, which is common in my child's case. But at least I knew it was happening, and she was learning about idioms and that she didn't like it, but at least I knew she was learning it. I have a verbal child who could tell me, but a lot of times that's not the case. So if there's any question, you have the right to ask for those session notes to see them during an IEP meeting, and they have to produce them for you. So just another little aside that I learned along the way. Okay. And like I said, do not throw anything away. If in doubt, put it in the box and just label your box folders so you know what's in there. Once everything is in your binders, that's when you want to sit down in all of our major times of free time, which is never. Try to make a little bit of time here and there to read the book from beginning to end. When you see the medical records and the school records and the psychological records all together, the big picture becomes so much more clear about your child, and you will totally be able to advocate more appropriately for their needs because it's all fresh in your mind. And also, a lot of times when it's segregated out, it's hard to put the pieces together. But when you're a medical drama happened and there was also drama going on at school, that correlation becomes so much more clear in your head that there was really something bigger going on at that moment. And being able to have that full clear picture about your child, it's invaluable. If you don't understand how to read assessments, and it's hard, like the bell curve eluded me in high school, I swear. But when Pete made us, I'll show you. He made us draw the bell curve in one of the books I got in his class. I don't know if you can see it. And he explained it and how our kids' assessments and standard deviations work. I was like, the light bulbs were like, bing, bing, bing. And It was like all of those assessments where your standard child's standard score in, say, reading comprehension was, 60. You'd be like, okay, but you're thinking on a scale of 100, but it's really 115. And that 60 could only be in the 37th percentile. That's not so good. So that's what I'm saying. It seems like one thing. And if you don't understand what they're telling you, and you don't know what you don't know, and that's what they sometimes, the seedier school districts will bank on your not understanding, and they can use like gobbledygook speak, like, oh, my child. I'll give you a perfect example of that. My son in 10th grade, we had an independent assessment done, and the evaluator informed me that my son was reading at the 4th grade comprehension level in 10th grade. Well, no wonder school was so hard for him all those years. Even math, which used to be his shining, like he was good at math. Once you can't comprehend the directions of math or word problems, math becomes as difficult as everything else. And his ability to compute was mired in not understanding what he was told to do in the first place. I literally had like a heart attack over that. I had no idea because they kept telling me he was average. Well, the average is a subjective range that some human picks instead of mathematically decided. And that range can be really big. So the subjective labels are useless. It's the hardcore math that you really need to know. And it was shocking because um, the basic level of reading, what do you call it, where you actually can read, is 6th grade. So my son at a 10th grade wasn't even to 6th grade, which is the basic minimum to not be considered illiterate. And so he was functionally illiterate in 10th grade. And was capable there. He clearly had a learning disability that was missed over the years. So once we knew that that was the problem, I could hold the district accountable and say, time to like do like serious, compensatory fixing of this. And he now reads, I wouldn't say it's totally normal, but he was able to pass his commercial driver's license on the first try. So his ability to comprehend is greatly improved because he had tons of one-on-one sessions to learn how to do it the right way, and he was capable of it. Whereas my daughter is ending school with a 5th grade comprehension, which for an intellectual disability is pretty good, but she'll never be able to fully understand safety stuff. But my son was capable. It was just the school district kept blaming his behaviors and blaming everything other than the fact that he actually had a reading disability that everybody missed. So that's why I'm saying understanding those assessment scores and how to read them really makes the difference and gives you power to really advocate effectively for your child. So that's why I said Pete's, one of his training is about that. And it's incredibly helpful because standard deviations didn't mean diddly squat to me when it comes to human beings and their mental abilities. But now I totally understand why you're considered intellectually disabled over when it's 2 standard deviations below the average or the normal of 85 to 115. I think I got that right. So, and it explains where your child falls and it helps you understand. And in her case, we had too high expectations on my daughter. We kept thinking she just wasn't sitting still long enough to learn, and it turns out she really can't. So making that, can't versus won't, a whole different ball of wax, and then you adjust your expectations of your child when you understand that it really is can't, and it's like super can't because there is an intellectual, the brain is affected enough to not be able to learn what a 12th grader would learn. So that's why I'm saying if you don't have these skills as the moms, this is where you really need them to really understand your child's assessments at school or out of school. Okay, and here's some other tips that I have for IEPs. So when you read the documentation, that's when you want to stick the notes on the important stuff that you're going to refer back to. And if there's any other things that are huge, like questionable or not, um, that stick out in your head as being a problematic time in your child's life, you might want to like jot down some notes, punch them and stick them in the book. And that way, if you refer back to it, whatever was clear in your mind at the time of seeing the big picture will still be there, because we can't remember everything. So even if it's a handwritten note, pop it in there. Just make sure that any services discussed at your IEP are in the IEP. It's really easy to forget that they say it and then don't do it. You're, and let's see. I also say triple check the math, because in California, our IEPs were given in the, you guys call it the exceptional students here. They were special ed students there. But the time in those classrooms, the separated classrooms, is by minutes. So I had to actually sit one day and figure how many minutes are in a school day and how many minutes are they doing, because you'd be surprised at how many minutes were underestimated or incorrectly written in there. And you'll also notice this in goals. When they say we're going to do this 3 out of 5 times with 80% accuracy, and then you figure out, and I'm just making this up because I'm terrible at math, that 3/5 is not 80%. Maybe it is, but you see what I'm saying? That it doesn't get, it gets lost in translation and the math is incorrect. And that actually makes a difference when they're doing assessments on your child to make sure that they made that, they met that goal or didn't meet that goal. Is if the math is wrong in the beginning, it's either the expectation could be too low or too high, and no wonder your child either passed with flying colors or didn't pass at all, is because the math in the goals was incorrect. So you have to make sure that all of the math is accurate. And that's also for services too. Like, we're going to give 30 minutes of OT once a week. Then they're going to give you a final based on the school year, and make sure that math is correct, that 30 minutes times 20 weeks is what they say. And sometimes, again, that's not a diss on the school district. Some of them who are not math professionals are also bad at math too. So you just want to make sure that everything is checked up on. Parents' concern section. Like every single thing that is a concern going into.
For a second, I just want to see, I know you've been sharing such great information. I just wanted to see if anyone had any questions.
Oh yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, and if you do have questions, anyone, feel free, well, you could say it now or make sure to put it in the chat box. So that way I'll make sure Rosemary answers the questions.
I'm sorry, I wasn't looking at the chats. I
No,
apologize.
I have been, and I haven't seen anything, but I have just been looking to see if anyone had any questions. Okay, so no questions, but if there are, put it in the chat box. Oh, okay. Crystal does have a question.
Sure.
Yeah, I was gonna type it out, but I feel really dumb as saying this, but I don't always know, like, say we're sitting in an IEP and I've got my little tabs or something to mark something. And I've got the rights law book on order. It's supposed to be in today. It was supposed to be here yesterday. Now they're saying today. So I do have that coming. And then I'll be able to read the other one that's coming also from Jane Windsor. But like when we're sitting there, I don't think I have enough grasp on things to know, to mark something to say, I don't feel like this is enough, or, to dissect it enough, to know that where they're not, doing enough to meet my children's needs. And is that something that I will get from, reading these books, or do I need to dig deeper somewhere else?
Nope. And I'm going to tell you how I learned from a parent who was ahead of me, who gave me great advice, is never, ever, 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 ever sign an IEP at an IEP meeting.
Yeah, and see, take it home. Every single one.
They're going to pressure you. So it depends on the district. they stopped pressuring me because they knew I wasn't ever going to sign a document virtually ever at a meeting. Because again, I can't separate my emotional ties to my children from the heat of the moment. I simply cannot do it. And sometimes our meetings did get a little bit contentious and I needed to decompress and actually go back. So I asked for the draft ahead so I was prepared. And then I could mark ahead of time what I questioned. And then I could ask my questions in the meeting and then I could reflect afterwards. And again, we also have the right to, again, don't quote me on Florida law. I believe this is federal, but I'm not 100% sure. You have the right to record the meetings, and some districts are good about it. Mine was. So I always, when I signed the form that said I'm going to attend, I always write, I will be recording, and you have to give them 24 hours notice. And I would just click on the record on my iPhone and record the meeting. And then if I questioned anything when I reviewed it, the final they hand you as you're leaving the meeting, I could go back and listen to the recording. If it wasn't recorded, I at least had the ability to like decompress from the emotions and feeling, crappy about whatever terrible thing I learned that day. And separate that out and really look at that IEP and get a calculator out and make sure that the math was correct. So that's how I did it, is I just flat out refused to sign them. And then I was very good because they're stressed out and they need to get their work done too. I usually gave it back to them within 2 days, and I would drive it over to our district's office and hand it in or take it to the school. I would always ask, where do you want me to return it? And I would honor like within 2 days.
Okay. So you
So
do,
that you're not
you
holding
get
them
it back
up from,
to them.
because the longer you take to sign it, the longer they can't make it happen. It's not
Right.
legal until your autograph is on there. So that's how I handled it. And that made night and day difference. And again, I didn't know that for years and years, and I would just blindly sign them and just sign away so many things that I didn't understand. So I go home and again, if you have to Google something, if you don't understand it, you'll find it.
Okay.
Sometimes they use psych words that are a little beyond because I don't have a psych degree. So I learned to ask questions or send an email to somebody who was at the meeting and say, can you clarify? I want to be sure I understand. And then again, save that email, but you'll have an answer so that everything in there is crystal clear for you. But that's, if you sign it and take it for verbatim, then you're going to have to request another meeting and then dispute it. It's just way easier to go home when the emotions are low and make sure you get it. Does
Okay.
that help?
That does help. And now what you're talking about is like the form that they pass around at the end, because what they say is we're just signing to say that we each were here, that we each attended the meeting. And that's what I'm signing. So that's a little bit of I don't want to say that they're lying to me, but that's always how it's been presented is, please sign that you were here today. So I've just never even questioned whether or not I should sign it.
The IEP that I was used to there had a attendance page, and I always signed the attendance pages, but the box where you cross or check that says I agree was the part I would not do in person. I would always say I was there. I actually asked that question to a lawyer once that was doing a talk, and they said it's okay to sign attendance, but be sure that's all you're assigning on that. And it clearly said on the IEP, these are the folks that attended, and it was the name and who they were.
Right.
So like mother, special ed teacher, gen ed teacher, administrator, blah, 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 whoever was showing up. That part I had no problem signing once I knew that it was safe to sign that. And I've only signed one IEP in person, and that was my last one a couple weeks ago because it was the ending one, and it was just confirming her adult education, and there was no other thing but that. So I felt comfortable because I had already knew that's what I was going to put her in, the program of the 3 I had a choice of. So I felt comfortable signing that one, and that way the show could get on the road. But there was no dispute about that. But any other thing that's like an annual or especially a triannual, when they give you all those assessments, for goodness sakes, that's the one you really need the time to read it, because they had weeks, they had 60 days to write this and understand about your child. And they're giving you 1 hour meeting. no. You're never going to grasp it all. And again, can't separate the emotions. It's impossible.
Right.
You
Okay.
are good to go as somebody else's advocate. We are the best people to take to other people's IEPs because we can be more um,
Objective.
critical of what we're hearing when the poor mom is sitting next to us feeling emotional and trying not to cry. So if you have friends who have children in the same circumstance, you're the best one to say, do you want me to attend your IEP with you? And you keep your mouth shut, but you write notes, you really listen, and you're the ears of what the mom can't process because they're feeling like crap at the moment because they've just been told their child has yet another whatever. So anyway, I've done that and helped other people too, particularly outside of my own school district. I wouldn't do it in because I had too many dramas with them, but I helped other people with that. And then there's two.
Yeah, because that's what I was thinking with Crystal. I think of, so many of the moms that, working with, you're dealing with the school, the behaviors. I mean, there's also your own trauma and your cognitive skills where you're at. And so I can imagine a lot of moms listening to you being like, oh my God, do I have the capacity to do this? This feels like so much. And so, yeah, so I'm just curious if you felt that way and how were you able to deal with that? Because you might have not been at your cognitive best because you're dealing with the school and your kids.
In the beginning, you kind of feel like if you don't know any better because nobody else in your world had a child with this kind of special need, that the school district is there to help your child and they're going to do the very best for your child. So you take for granted that they are doing all of that and this is the best thing and you believe them. And then when you get smarter over time, you recognize that it's not always deliberate, like they're being blank holes. It's just that they're trying to make this much budget go for this many kids with this many resources and not enough federal funding to honor IDEA. So all of that makes them have to make horrible decisions. But in the process, sometimes they're pretty horrible to us as parents and they treat us as idiots. And I especially find that true for English language learner parents. And in Los Angeles, that was a common problem. You have a right, no matter what your language of your primary language, to have your IEP spoken in that language. They have to find an interpreter who can come and speak the language if the English is not the first language of the family. So, and in our elementary school, there was like 28 languages spoken. So I knew a family who was Greek. They had to get a Greek interpreter to come in there and do the IEP. So that particular family, because they had a son in my daughter's class. So but most people don't know that's what the law is, and they'll try because it's cost them money. Unless there's somebody who speaks Greek in the school district, it's a pain in the butt to do that. But that is the law. And that is so the parents have a full understanding. And the Spanish speakers, oh my gosh, it was terrible sometimes what the district got away with just because the moms, they just thought just because they didn't speak English, they were idiots. And it's not true at all. It's just that they're thinking in Spanish and you're talking in English. What do you expect? And they banked on that. And those were the kids who often got the least amount of services and needed it as much as everybody else's kids did. So those are like the things that you'll learn. I was going to tell you also, Crystal, this is my rights law book, as you can see. And I even have notes in the front page of things that he told us to write on there of what are the most important things. So when you get your book, if you want to contact me, I can like give you like the important pages because when you get it, you're going to be like, huh? I don't understand this book. It's unless you're a lawyer who can understand what the squigglies mean and 300.25, it's hard to figure this out. But because he made us do that and that, I know where to look for the things that are important. And then he taught us how to kind of read the book. So I'm happy to help you with that because I'll just give you what he gave me. It's not like it's mine. Those are his Post-it notes. And I think I've added 2 because I looked for what are teachers supposed to have educationally to teach our kids, like what training.
Yeah.
And I found that in the book, but it took a long time for me to find it. And only because I remembered he said something about it, but I couldn't easily find that on my own. So I am not a whiz. That is thanks to that class. So
Well, I appreciate that a lot. Thank you. And thank you for even like what you're doing today. And I had written down the quote, I think maybe Tamara sent it out to us. And I wrote it in my notes so that when my book gets here, I can write it in there. But yeah, I was thinking about all your tabs and
it looks gross, but it works. This is another book that he also gave us. It's all about tests and assessments. You can buy this off of his website too. And this, I will help anybody in this group. So it's not just Crystal. So if anybody else wants to contact me, I can go through and tell you the important tabs. And it won't be all of those because some of those are just, you know, my personal ones. But this book also, it doesn't.
You know what we can do, Rosemary, is maybe once everyone gets the book, because I know there's a group of people, we could set up, maybe not the support group, because I don't know if everyone has the book, but we could set up another special time where we can have a group of the people just to talk about this and you can go over the book. So we can, so you don't have to do it with a bunch of different people.
Okay. However I can help, because again, somebody helped me. And it's, and then you'll be able to tell like the other FASD moms in your area, this book is like the most important book to buy. That, and I think Diane Malbin's little purple book those are my two Bibles of FASD or surviving it. And then this is another one. It's all about IEPs. And this also is very helpful about what all those sections mean. And he puts a lot of, like examples. So it's very helpful when he talks about a child with a speech impediment versus a child who has orthopedic needs. So he really kind of gives you good examples of all of that. And then the advocacy, emotions to advocacy, that's the other one. This is also a really good book too. And I have, again, lots of the Post-its, and that's from, he told us what to mark in here. And some of these are also me. And then each of my little tabs has, because he actually gives you a packet of these little tabs in the bag with the books at the class and highlighters, because he wants you to go, he'll tell you, turn to page so-and-so and highlight. And I'm like so grateful because I could zoom in on what I needed. And each of these tabs has in red writing exactly what it's tabbing. So I know, yes. So same thing. And if you're getting ready to argue in due process or something, he has each, like 2015, this is all the like the monumental cases to do with special education throughout the country. It's the big ones were the Andrew F. case a couple years ago that the Supreme Court voted 8-0 because that's when they were short justice. And that was that, you know, de minimis or basic, like barely getting by, making any improvement is not what the law says. And the Supreme Court said that is in fact true. They have to make the effort based on your child's abilities, not on just barely getting by. And all 8 of them agreed, which was shocking. It's probably the last time they've had a 8-0. Seriously, I'm not kidding. It's probably the last time they had all of them agreed on a case. Wow. And it was about special education. So, and Andrew F. took place initially in Colorado. That case is really interesting to read, as much as I understood the legal gobbledygook, but it was a family with a child with autism and the kid was making barely any progress. The family moved him to a private school and he made great progress. And then they said, so now you guys have to pay for him because you refused to do this. And they had all the documents showing the tiny little increments and that their goals were not written to, because it's always to get to grade level. That's always the goal, unless your child has an ID. It's always grade level. If they're 2 grades behind, the goal on the IEP should be to catch up. Always, no questions, the goal. And now the child might not meet that goal in a year, but that's because they didn't also do the right interventions. because anybody without an ID should be able to get to grade level. They just have to think outside the box and figure out a way to get your child there. So again, I had to temper my daughter's goals to other things because grade level is not possible for her, but it definitely was for my son. So that's what I'm saying about that.
Okay.
For you guys to help you recognize if you're, you particularly if you still have little ones, that there's a lot of catching up that can be done. And it's not always about the behavior, because they have to remember the behavior is really telling you a symptom of their disorder. And it's not just, and if they figure out why the behavior is happening instead of just punishing the behavior, they usually can curtail the behavior. We got to the point with my daughter that the last almost since ninth grade, her behavior support plan went away. And I actually, when the district suggested that, I was like, are you sure? And they said, this is the one thing we can easily put back, because everything that you give up is often hard to get back. They said, this is easy to get back. And I also checked because I had a lawyer for my son at the time. So I asked her, and she goes, yes, if your daughter if they're saying she's not having those kind of behaviors at school, get that thing out of the IEP, because then they're not going to like use all that mumbo jumbo to figure out, because she was behaving really well in school. She had, what do you call it? Issues with anxiety, but once they learned how to accommodate the anxiety and let her leave the classroom for 5 minutes and come back, problem solved. And then there was never any escalation of behavior, because they learned to address it, or like nip it in the bud and do it correctly. So that's the difference. And that, I mean, I felt like a huge sense of like, yay, when that BSP went out of the IEP, because she could really comport herself in school. Now, that was not the case for my son at all. Like, his needed to be there until the very end, and rightfully so, because that's how he acted out in so much more ways than she ever did. So it was a testament to her that she learned how to deal with school anxiety in a much more productive way, and the school supported that. And I will give credit to the California school for that. And then the Florida school did awesome with that. So they read the IEP, saw the accommodation, said no problem. And I was like, really? And they said, yeah, no problem. I was like, okay. And we did not have problems with that. So and the other things I also want to tell you, it's really good to have a list of all your providers, like an ongoing, like I created a spreadsheet. I don't know if you can see that. I did this for my daughter's first year, because back in the day in 2003, we still had day runners. There was no iPhones yet, or even Blackberries yet. So it was still a day runner or some kind of paper calendar. And I went back to my day runner and I created this. And in her first year of life, between social workers, doctors, therapists, you name it, there was 73 visits. I'm like, how in the heck did I work a full-time job and go to 73 appointments? But we did. I managed, I figured it out. But you might not be able to keep this much detail, but there are times where, as long as you have a record and can create this if you need it. I actually needed this for something, and it showed the story so well. Like, I was shocked that I actually survived this, because she had so many visits with social workers. Because initially, when they place the child, they're visiting you weekly, and then there's case reviews, and then there's the classes and all kinds of stuff. So, and then she also was a kind of a failure to thrive in the beginning. She wasn't gaining weight, she was losing weight. So that it took like, weekly visits to the pediatrician to get settled, because she was having withdrawals. So anyway, this is a really useful thing. If nothing else, if you just handwrite on a piece of paper all the various providers and the dates of service, or at least what year you saw them, that way you can go back to your book if you have any documentation and know that you saw that. Because I can't remember, she saw asthma specialists and ear, nose, and throat specialists. Like, now I can remember all that, but in the moment, sometimes they just all run together. So this is a really helpful document to use, particularly if you're trying to show somebody just how needy our children are. This was like 73 visits in 1 year. This was 0 to 1. And I was like, it got worse. It didn't get better as more people were added in. And then the other thing I mentioned in the slides is a lot of our children have AAP, Adoptions Assistance Program, so they don't qualify for Social Security. And frankly, AAP is way better. In this state, not so much. In California, it was way better. So we don't have to worry about SSI for our kids now, but in the future, that might be the case. And Social Security, as we all have heard a million times, is really hard to get. And so it's really a good idea, particularly if your child has a lot of interactions with law enforcement or with like wraparound services, because that's like hardcore post adoption services. And yes, I had those for my son, and they were miraculously wonderful. They actually led me to the VIP program in Los Angeles, which is the fetal alcohol place to go. The physician that runs that place is like one of the foremost experts in this. And I didn't know this service was there. And it was the wraparound people who found it for me. And because my child had Medicaid, we could go there. And they gave me the right kind of therapy, families moving forward. They taught me how to better parent my children the way our kids need. I always say throw out the parenting handbook and get the FASD parenting handbook, because it's totally different. And so being able to have all this information is really helpful. But for Social Security, you want to start now. If you think your child's going to qualify for it or should qualify for it, go back in your memory and mark down all those sentinel events that happened. If you had law enforcement, or there was issues at school or suspensions or any of that, you need those records. And if you start writing those down now, like create a spreadsheet, just or jot it in a calendar or something that your child won't be able to see because it's depressing. But then when you're filling out the 8 million tons of paperwork for SSI, you're already halfway, because the memories are already jotted down, and you won't forget those sentinel situations that happen that could very well qualify your child, because they have 5 mental health diagnoses in addition to fetal alcohol. I mean, my daughter has 3. And so all of that together, and also applying for APD for the families who have intellectual disability as part of your FAS, that too, like all those records, having all of that. I applied for it when we first moved to Florida, and we got it. It's just that she's now sitting on that million-year waiting list. I keep making the list get bigger because it feels horrible to have to wait years for services we already had in another state. And no diss to Florida, it's just the way it's done here, and didn't have a choice about that. But it will really make a huge difference when you're sitting down to fill out those papers, when you can say on this day and produce something to verify that we ended up in juvenile court because whatever the reason. And again, I'm not saying it's always law enforcement that's the issue, but if those big sentinel things can really help you get your Social Security. So I'm just saying that's another thing that I learned from another parent, to start writing all that down. And I do have running lists, because my daughter will qualify for Social Security after AAP is done. And I'll first have to do this nightmare application too. And I've got all the documentation in the books able to use it for and copy it for them to prove it. And hopefully we'll get it on the first try, because that's the goal.
Yeah, we just received our denial for my 18-year-old for Social Security. And she's got some pretty big diagnoses. So I am going to go through the appeal, but the psychiatrist that did her big workup already suggested to me, because I asked her about getting all of the children evaluated, because it's going to be so long before I can get them to the Florida Center. She told me even without full evaluations to go ahead and apply right now, because it takes so long. Just like with the APD, I knew to apply for that, far in advance, but I didn't realize with Social Security, she said, even before you have firm documentation, go ahead and apply. She said, if there's any question in your mind, whether or not they're going to need Social Security, apply now. And you know, if they need it, then you've got a jump start on it. If they don't, then you know, no harm, no foul.
Yeah, and you can't double dip. It's AAP or SSI, so that's the only reason I haven't applied yet for her. And because she got approved for APD, hopefully that's going to make it easier. But I'm hopeful that my books have enough records and documentation to justify her getting Social Security. You know, as little as the amount is, it's still better than nothing.
Right.
Can you explain what APD is? Someone was asking.
Oh,
Agency for Persons with Disability.
thank you. I can never remember it because it's regional center in California. It's when your child has developmental disabilities, like significant ones, usually like Prader-Willi, autism, depending if they're on the lower functioning of autism. Autism, I don't think automatically gets it. They have to be have mental incapacity. Intellectual disability, it's not fetal alcohol. That never gets us anything. It's the ID that does. And like Down syndrome, kids with Down syndrome, it's federal, or excuse me, state services to apply for, to receive like respite care or in-home nursing care, and families who have children who are on trachs and vents and stuff. There's different kinds of programs, and there's programs for people who have mental illness, but for developmental disabilities, and that for fetal alcohol syndrome, that would be our kids. And you apply, and like my daughter, or excuse me, my sister, my youngest sister here, who lives in the west coast of Florida, she has an intellectual disability. She was born with it. And when my mom and my folks and my sister moved here, she had these services up in Pennsylvania, and then we applied, and it took her 2 years to get off the waiting list. And then she's able to live in her own apartment, and 3 different women visit her once a week. One helps to make sure that she has all her medical visits done. One helps her with socializing. So they go out and bowl, or except for pandemic time, they were going out and doing social activities. And then one is there to help her make sure her bills are paid. So that means her Social Security and her food stamps are all used appropriately. They take her grocery shopping, because my parents are aging and can't really do all of this. And right now, my father fell and broke his shoulder, and my mom is legally blind. So we have the blind leading the blind right now. So my parents can't help her at all. So it's like, thank goodness we have it. These services enable my sister to have an independent, mostly independent life, and live in the community instead of being stuck in some institution somewhere. So that's what is considered a human right. So that's where developmental disability programs in all 50 states are available. It's just hard to get them. But once you have them, like, I'm blown away with what my sister gets. And it's incredibly helpful, and probably costs the state a good chunk of change. But that's what those services are there for. And she is so happy not to have to live with my parents anymore. And she's been successfully doing this for the last 4 years. And they help her renew her lease, and they make sure nobody's taking advantage of her. And our family is thrilled to death with those services. Now, my daughter will not be able to live in that circumstance because she needs 24-hour supervision. However, we hopefully will have some kind of a program that will work for Maya, is my daughter, in the future, so that she can have her own semi-independent life. And that's what APD provides is, they come to your house and provide services. They give the mom or parents respite, which I miss terribly. Just being able to grocery shop by myself in peace. Or I literally sometimes in the evenings would just go sit in the grocery store parking lot under a light and read a book in my car in quiet, when everything was in the chaotic younger years. And that, like, 2 hours was like my sanity, literally my sanity. And now that she's older, it's a different kind of struggle. But I don't feel like my sanity is being lost. However, I do miss having, and she doesn't need a babysitter, but she needs a companion here. She can't, it's just like how our kids will remember things one day and not the other. Well, that doesn't work very well with safety when it comes to like using the stove, or, remembering to lock the door. So that's why she needs to have somebody kind of there. But, and they used to,
So I
Sorry.
apologize, Rosemary, we're at time. There's
Okay.
so much to say. So I was wondering if maybe, because I'm going to be sending this out to also everyone who's on the email, because I know there's some people who wanted to watch this, but weren't able to participate. That so if anyone has some more questions for Rosemary or would be interested in doing a follow-up meeting of really like how to look at the rights book, like going over some of that, send me an email. It's probably easier that way because I don't know if I want to do it during the support group or we do it at another time because I don't know if everyone in the support group would want to, so I'll have to figure this out. But maybe this will just be the beginning of many conversations with Rosemary.
Well, I hope I wasn't too boring and that people learn some stuff that's useful. It's just I don't want families that have children that particularly are younger than mine to fight the fights that I had to fight without the knowledge. And now that I have it, I want to impart it so that you all are better prepared and can really advocate and get what your child needs and have better relationships with your schools or whoever. So that's my intent.
Rosemary, you were not a bore, and I'm so excited that you moved to Florida and that we can have all of your wisdom because you've been through it. And so, yes, I would love to have continued conversations with Rosemary. I'm now gonna stop the recording. Yeah.